NASCAR champion Kyle Busch, his family revealing he died from severe pneumonia that then progressed into sepsis.
On May 21st, 2026, NASCAR lost one of the greatest drivers to ever strap into a stock car. Kyle Busch, a two-time Cup Series champion and the winningest driver across NASCAR's top three national series, died at 41 years old. What makes his death so hard to process isn't just the loss itself. It's how ordinary the 11 days before it looked. A radio call at a road course. A record-breaking win. A son's birthday. An arcade with Mario Andretti. And then, without warning, a bathroom floor in Concord, North Carolina, and a phone call that changed everything. This is the timeline of those 11 days, and the tribute from a former rival that gave fans a window into who Kyle Busch really was at the end. Hours after NASCAR confirmed Busch's death, Dale Earnhardt Jr. didn't post the usual condolence message. He wrote something longer, more personal, and more revealing than anyone expected. He described the two of them as having gone through what he called a genuinely difficult relationship for years, which, if you know anything about NASCAR history between 2005 and 2017, is putting it mildly. Busch and Earnhardt spent over a decade colliding, literally and figuratively. There was the infamous 2008 incident at Richmond, where Busch turned Earnhardt out of the lead in the closing laps, costing him a chance to snap a winless streak. There was the fact that Rick Hendrick released Busch from Hendrick Motorsports after the 2007 season, a business decision that opened a roster spot for Earnhardt, a move that hung over both of their careers for years afterward. Fans picked sides. Rivalries like theirs used to define the sport. What Earnhardt revealed in his tribute is that it was Busch, not him, who made the first move toward peace. According to Earnhardt, Busch walked into his motorhome one day and struck up a conversation about how each of them managed their race teams. That conversation became the opening for a friendship neither of them had expected to build. Earnhardt said he was eager to move past their history, but it was Busch who actually made the effort happen. The two even did media appearances together afterward, joking about the years they'd spent making each other miserable. Then came the detail that hit hardest. Earnhardt shared that he and Busch had recently been talking about Busch driving one of Earnhardt's late-model cars at North Wilkesboro that summer, a plan that, if it had happened, would have united two fan bases that spent a decade booing each other. Busch seemed genuinely excited about it. That plan never got the chance to happen. Busch died 8 days before it was supposed to move forward. One of the more unlikely feel-good stories NASCAR could have told this year instead became one of its saddest footnotes. Not a rivalry that ended with a dramatic final showdown, but one that ended mid-conversation. To understand how sudden this all was, you have to go back to May 10th, when Busch was racing the Cup Series event at Watkins Glen in the number 8 Chevrolet for Richard Childress Racing. For the first time in a season that hadn't given him much to celebrate, his car had real speed. He was running inside the top 10, looking like the version of himself fans remembered from his Joe Gibbs racing years. Late in the race, over the team radio, Busch asked his crew to track down a specific doctor at Ortho Carolina, saying he'd need to see him once the race ended. When his spotter asked whether he wanted the doctor to meet him at the car or the motorhome, Busch said the motorhome. The exchange went out live on the broadcast, and it was explained simply. Busch had been dealing with a sinus cold all week, and a bumpy, high-G road course like Watkins Glen can turn even a minor head cold into a genuinely miserable day behind the wheel. He finished 8th, his best result of the season, and the moment was forgotten almost as soon as it happened. In hindsight, a few details stand out. The doctor Busch asked for by name is the director of motorsports medicine at a practice that has worked with Cup Series teams for years, not someone a driver requests casually. And that Sunday also happened to be his daughter Lennox's 4th birthday, meaning that while she celebrated at home, her father was 2 states away, asking for medical help after a race. 5 days later, Busch would still be telling reporters he wasn't feeling great. Nobody around him treated it as anything more than a lingering cold. There was no reason to. By Friday, May 15th, Busch was at Dover Motor Speedway for the Craftsman Truck Series race, and whatever had been bothering him didn't show on the track. He qualified on the pole, swept both stages, led 147 of 200 laps, and beat Ty Majeski to the finish by more than 3 seconds. It was his 69th career Truck Series win, a record in that series that may stand for a long time. Afterward, in a post-race interview, a reporter asked why winning never gets old for him. Busch's answer, watched back now, lands very differently than it did in the moment. He said, in essence, that you take every win you can get, because you never know which one will be your last, so you cherish all of them. He said something similar again minutes later when asked how many more wins he was chasing. It was the kind of thing drivers say all the time. NASCAR interviews are full of cliches about not taking anything for granted. There was nothing in his tone or delivery that suggested he meant it as anything more than a reflection on a career that had gone through a rough stretch in Cup competition. But 6 days before his death, twice in the same interview session, Kyle Busch told the world not to take moments for granted. Context has a way of turning an offhand comment into something that feels impossible to unhear. The next day, Saturday, May 16th, Busch told reporters at Dover that he still wasn't feeling right, that the cough from the week before had been fairly bad and hadn't fully cleared up. Still, nobody treated it as alarming. He'd just won a race. Drivers race through colds constantly. It's part of the culture. That culture is also part of why what happened days later caught the entire garage off guard. On Monday, May 18th, Busch's son Brexton turned 11. Busch posted a set of photos on Instagram celebrating Brexton growing up around racetracks and victory lanes, writing about how proud he and his wife Samantha were of the person their son was becoming. That post is still the last thing Busch ever shared publicly. Samantha posted her own tribute to Brexton that same day, describing the pride of watching him grow into a thoughtful, driven young man, the kind of ordinary, loving family post that takes on a much heavier weight in hindsight. The following day, Tuesday, May 19th, Busch and Brexton traveled to Durham, North Carolina, for the opening of an Andretti indoor karting location, where Mario Andretti himself made an appearance. A bystander at the event later described seeing Busch and his son playing arcade games together, clearly enjoying a private father-son moment in the middle of a public event. Andretti would later recall the encounter too, describing Busch as smiling and in good spirits, a memory he said became especially hard to process once he learned what happened next. That Tuesday was also the day Busch texted NASCAR CEO Steve O'Donnell, casually floating the idea of an over 40 eligibility rule that would let veteran drivers like himself keep competing in more Truck Series races going forward. It was a small, forward-looking, entirely normal exchange between a driver still planning out his future in the sport. 24 hours after that conversation with his son at the karting facility, Kyle Busch would be on a bathroom floor, struggling to breathe. On Wednesday, May 20th, Busch drove to the General Motors Charlotte Technical Center in Concord, North Carolina, for simulator work, a completely routine part of his week. Chevrolet teams use that facility constantly for race preparation, and there was nothing unusual about him being there. At around 5:30 that evening, someone at the facility called 911. The Cabras County Sheriff's Office later released audio of that call. The caller described a man experiencing shortness of breath, overheated, feeling like he might pass out, and coughing up blood. The caller said the man was on the bathroom floor but conscious, repeating multiple times that he was awake, and asked paramedics to arrive without sirens, directing them to a side entrance. Busch was taken from the facility to a hospital in the Charlotte area. That call is the clearest public record of what was actually happening inside Busch's body before his death. Everything before it, the sinus cold, the radio request for a doctor, the lingering cough, reads like the early signs of something building. What happened in that bathroom was the moment it broke through. On the morning of Thursday, May 21st, a statement went out on Busch's social media accounts saying he had experienced a severe illness resulting in hospitalization and would not be competing that weekend at Charlotte Motor Speedway. Richard Childress Racing named Austin Hill as his replacement for the Coca-Cola 600 and said Busch's car would be waiting for him when he recovered. A few hours later, a joint statement from the Busch family, Richard Childress Racing, and NASCAR confirmed that Kyle Busch had died. The statement called him a rare, generational talent and a future Hall of Famer, and named his wife Samantha, his children Brexton and Lennox, his parents, and his brother Kurt. At that point, no cause of death had been disclosed. NASCAR CEO Steve O'Donnell addressed the loss at a press conference the next day at Charlotte Motor Speedway, describing Busch in blunt, affectionate terms and saying the sport planned to honor him by racing that weekend, because that's what Busch would have wanted. Asked about the cause of death, O'Donnell said it was too soon after receiving the news to get into specifics out of respect for the family, and that more information would come. He also shared that Busch had texted him just 2 days earlier about the over 40 eligibility idea, a conversation that, unbeknownst to O'Donnell at the time, happened while Busch's health was already quietly unraveling. 2 days later, on Saturday, May 23rd, the Busch family released a follow-up statement with a medical explanation. Busch had developed severe pneumonia that progressed into sepsis, resulting in rapid and overwhelming complications. Sepsis occurs when the body's response to an infection spirals out of control and begins damaging its own organs and tissue, a genuine medical emergency that can move from manageable to life-threatening in a short window of time, which lines up with just how fast Busch's condition changed between that Wednesday simulator session and his death the next day. Richard Childress Racing also announced it would retire the number 8 car indefinitely, saying no one else could carry the number the way Busch had, and that it would be reserved for Brexton if he chooses to pursue NASCAR racing himself one day. It's a decision that mirrors what RCR did in 2001 after Dale Earnhardt SRS death, when the team parked the number 3 until Austin Dillon was ready to drive it years later. Tributes came in from across the sport almost immediately. Denny Hamlin, Brad Keselowski, Jimmy Johnson, William Byron, Bubba Wallace, Rick Hendrick, and Joe Gibbs Racing all released statements describing Busch as one of the most talented, fierce, and influential drivers of his generation. A mentor to younger competitors and, for all his hard edges on track, someone deeply respected in the garage. One voice was notably absent in the first days afterward. Kurt Busch, Kyle's older brother, who had famously predicted his brother's greatness back in 2001 and stood beside him at Kyle's Hall of Fame red carpet appearance just months before his death. Kurt didn't post publicly right away, and given the weight of losing a sibling in the public eye, that silence was met with understanding rather than criticism from fans and media alike. Dale Earnhardt Jr. would go on to deliver a longer, televised tribute days later, on Amazon Prime's NASCAR broadcast ahead of the Coca-Cola 600. He recalled a story Busch had once told about how he wanted to be remembered, first for his on-track success, and second for having grown up in the sports spotlight since he was a teenager and coming out the other side of it. Earnhardt called him a driver who hated losing more than almost anyone he'd ever competed against, and noted that Busch's 234th National Series win, the one at Dover, came just days before his death. At Charlotte Motor Speedway that weekend, the tribute became even more emotional in person. Busch's family, Samantha, Brexton, Lennox, and Kurt, made a surprise appearance at a pre-race ceremony honoring him, standing near his stylized number 8 painted into the infield grass while Amazing Grace played. Earnhardt later described being caught off guard by their presence, saying it felt almost unbelievable that they had chosen to be there in person so soon after the loss. Line up the timeline and it's hard not to feel the weight of it. Busch won a race on a Friday. He celebrated his son's birthday on a Monday. He played arcade games with his kid and shook hands with a racing legend on a Tuesday. He collapsed on a Wednesday. By Thursday, he was gone. 11 days, start to finish, from a radio call about a sinus cold at Watkins Glen to a hospital in Charlotte. 41 years old. 2 Cup Series championships. 234 career wins across NASCAR's top 3 National Series, more than any driver in history. A marriage that had lasted since 2008. A son who wanted to follow in his footsteps. A daughter who had just turned 4. And, for the last several years of his life, a friendship with a former rival that neither of them saw coming. One that was supposed to lead to a seat fitting at North Wilkesboro 8 days after Busch died. He told a reporter at Dover that you never know when your last one is going to be, so you should cherish every one you get. He was talking,